The fluorescent lights of Carter and Sons estate auctions in Richmond, Virginia, cast harsh shadows across tables piled with forgotten belongings. Dr. James Harrison moved slowly through the crowded room, his trained eyes scanning each item with the patience of someone who understood that history often hid in plain sight. At 43, he had spent 2 decades as a historical appraiser, specializing in African American artifacts from the post-Civil War era. Most days brought nothing but reproductions and common household items. Today felt different. He paused at a cardboard box marked Miscellaneous Photographs 1880s, 1920s. Inside, beneath layers of crumbling newspaper, his fingers found a leather portfolio. The moment he opened it, his breath caught. The photograph was stunning, not for its artistic merit, but for its pristine preservation. A black family of 5 stared back at him across more than a century. The studio backdrop showed painted columns and draped fabric, typical of the era. The family was dressed formally. The father in a dark suit with a pocket watch chained. The mother in a high-collared dress with delicate lace. 3 young men in matching vests and ties. Harrison lifted the photograph closer to the light. The studio stamp on the bottom read Morrison and Sons Photography. Music, Richmond, Va. 1895. His pulse quickened. Photographs of black families from this period were rare, especially in such condition. But something else drew his attention, something he couldn't quite articulate yet. The oldest son, positioned on the right side of the frame, stood with unusual rigidity. His left hand rested against his vest, fingers arranged in what seemed like an awkward, unnatural position. "How much for the photo box?" Harrison asked the attendant, keeping his voice casual. "$15 for the lot," came the reply. He paid quickly, tucking the portfolio under his arm. Outside, the September afternoon felt suddenly charged with possibility. In his car, Harrison examined the image again under natural light. The son's hand position wasn't accidental. The fingers formed a deliberate configuration, too precise to be random. Harrison had seen similar gestures before in historical documents about fraternal organizations. His mind raced through possibilities as he drove back to his office at the Virginia Historical Society. The photograph felt alive in his hands, as though it had been waiting all these years to tell its story. Harrison didn't know it yet, but he had just found something that would consume the next 6 months of his life and rewrite a forgotten chapter of American history. The family in the frame had secrets, and their oldest son had left a message that transcended music time itself. Harrison's office overlooked Monument Avenue, where stone generals frozen in time stood watch over the city. He cleared his desk completely, laying the photograph under his professional grade magnifying lamp. The detail revealed under magnification was extraordinary. Every thread of fabric, every strand of hair visible with startling clarity. Morrison and Sons had been master craftsmen. He focused on the oldest son's hand. The young man appeared to be around 25 with intelligent eyes and a strong jawline. But it was the hand that held Harrison's attention. The thumb and index finger touched at the tips, forming a small circle. The middle finger extended straight upward. The ring finger and pinky curved inward toward the palm. Harrison photographed the gesture from multiple angles, then turned to his reference library. For 3 hours, he searched through books on Victorian photography, body language, and period customs. Nothing matched. Then he pulled down a worn volume titled Secret Societies and Post-Reconstruction America by Dr. Eleanor Whitmore. He flipped through chapters on Masonic traditions, labor unions, and immigrant mutual aid societies until he reached a section that made him sit up straight. African American fraternal orders and their coded communications. The Grand United Order of Oddfellows, the black branch of the International Order of Oddfellows, had established lodges throughout the South after the Civil War. These organizations provided life insurance, burial assistance, and music, financial support when banks refused to serve black customers. But they also served another purpose: protection. The book described how members used hand signals to identify each other safely in public spaces where open association could be dangerous. Harrison compared the photograph to a grainy illustration in the book. The similarity was unmistakable. The oldest son was making the sign of a worthy master, a high-ranking officer in the order. His heart pounded. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was a declaration of identity captured in a moment when such declarations could cost music everything. But why would someone risk displaying this so openly? Why preserve it in a photograph that could be seen by anyone? He needed more information. Harrison reached for his phone and dialed Marcus Freeman, a genealogist who specialized in African American family histories. "Marcus, I need your help tracking a family from Richmond, 1895. I have a photograph, but no names. Send me what you've got," Marcus replied. "But James, you sound excited. What did you find?" Harrison looked at the photograph again, at the young man's deliberate gesture frozen in time. "I think I found someone who is trying to tell us something. I just need to figure out what and why it was important enough to risk everything." Marcus Freeman's office was a chaos of filing cabinets, digitized census records, and wall-mounted genealogical charts. When Harrison arrived the next morning, Marcus already had documents spread across 3 tables. "I started with the studio," Marcus explained, pointing to a city directory from 1895. Morrison and Sons operated on Broad Street from 1889 to 1903. They kept client ledgers, and the Richmond Public Library has them on microfilm. They spent the afternoon in the library's archive room, scrolling through pages of elegant handwriting. Most entries were simple: names, dates, payment amounts. Then, on October 12, 1895, Harrison found it. Family portrait: Thomas, father; Ruth, mother; Daniel, 25; Isaiah, 21; Caleb, 15. Payment $350, address 412 Clay Street. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote down the information. Back at Marcus' office, they pulled the 1900 census for Richmond. The address on Clay Street showed a different family living there. No record of Thomas, Ruth, or their sons. "They moved," Marcus said, "or something happened to them. They expanded the search to surrounding counties." Nothing. They checked death records, property transfers, marriage licenses. The families seemed to have vanished between 1895 and 1900. "Let me try something else," Marcus said, turning to his computer. He accessed a database of African American newspapers from the period. The Richmond Planet, the Norfolk Journal, and Guide. He searched for the names individually. After 20 minutes, he stopped scrolling. "James, look at this. The Richmond Planet, November 2nd, 1895, page 3. Local businessman Thomas and family departed Richmond suddenly last week. Sources indicate threats from unknown parties forced the family's relocation. Community leaders expressed concern over increasing tensions." Harrison leaned closer to the screen. "It doesn't give their last name." "No," Marcus agreed. Papers often protected identities when reporting on racial violence, but the timing matches. 3 weeks after the photograph, they kept searching and found another mention in the December 14th, 1895 edition. "We have received word that the family of Thomas, formerly of Clay Street, has settled safely in Philadelphia. Their courage in the face of persecution will not be forgotten." Philadelphia. Harrison felt the investigation shift into focus. "We need to search Pennsylvania records now. If they settled there, maybe they stayed. Maybe there are descendants." Marcus nodded slowly. "This is bigger than just identifying a photograph, isn't it?" Harrison looked at the image on his phone screen. The young man with his deliberate hand signal, the family dressed in their finest clothes, faces calm despite whatever storm was approaching. "I think this family knew they were in danger when they took this picture. I think the oldest son left us a message, and I think we need to find out what happened to them." The train to Philadelphia took 5 hours. Harrison spent the journey reviewing everything he had gathered, the photograph, the newspaper clippings, notes on fraternal organizations. He had called ahead to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and a research librarian named Dr. Patricia Hughes agreed to meet him. When he arrived at the Society's building on Locust Street, Dr. Hughes was waiting in the main reading room with several boxes already pulled from the archives. "I found multiple Thomas families arriving in Philadelphia from Virginia between 1895 and 1900, she explained, gesturing to the documents. "But when you mentioned the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, that narrowed it considerably." She opened a leather-bound ledger. "This is the membership registry for Lodge Number 75, one of the largest Black Oddfellows chapters in Philadelphia. Look here, 1896. Harrison scanned the page until he saw it. Thomas Caldwell, transferred from Richmond Lodge, number 42, accompanied by wife Ruth, and sons Daniel, Isaiah, Caleb. Daniel Caldwell confirmed as worthy master. Richmond Caldwell, Harrison whispered, "That's them, that's the family." Dr. Hughes nodded, "And there's more." Daniel Caldwell became very active in the Philadelphia chapter. He's mentioned in meeting minutes regularly through 1897. Then she flipped forward several pages. Then his name disappears. February 1898. No death record in the lodge books, no transfer notice, just gone. Harrison felt a chill. What about the rest of the family? The younger sons continued as members for years. Isaiah became a teacher. Caleb a postal worker, both documented in city directories. Thomas and Ruth lived until the 1920s. But Daniel, she pulled out a thin file folder. This was filed separately. It's a letter from Ruth Caldwell to the lodge secretary, dated March 1898. Harrison opened the folder carefully. The letter was written in precise, elegant handwriting. "To the worthy secretary, it is with profound grief that I informed the brotherhood of my son Daniel's disappearance. He departed our home on February 14th to attend what he believed was an emergency lodge meeting. He never returned. Police have found no trace. We fear the worst, though we continue to hope and pray." His father and brothers asked that the lodge remember Daniel in their work, as he gave everything for the principles we hold dear. "Yours, Music in Fellowship, Ruth Caldwell." The reading room was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Harrison read the letter twice more. An emergency meeting that didn't exist. Someone lured him out. Dr. Hughes pulled out another document. There's a follow-up in the lodge minutes from April 1898. The brothers voted to investigate Daniel's disappearance privately. They were concerned that involving authorities might expose the lodge's activities, specifically their work helping families escape racial violence in other cities. Music. Harrison's mind raced the hand signal in the photograph. He was declaring his position as worthy master. "But why make it so visible?" "Maybe," Dr. Hughes said quietly. He knew that photograph might be the only proof he ever existed. Maybe he knew what was coming. Dr. Hughes led Harrison to a climate-controlled vault in the basement. The Grand United Order of Oddfellows kept meticulous records, she explained, unlocking a heavy door. But some of those records were deliberately obscured. They used coded language to document their most sensitive activities. She pulled out a box labeled Lodge 75, Administrative Correspondence 1890-1900. Inside were letters, telegrams, and handwritten reports. Harrison spent hours reading through them with Dr. Hughes translating the coded phrases. Safe arrival meant a family had been successfully relocated from a dangerous situation. Brotherhood assistance referred to financial support. Music's special protective measures indicated cases where violence was imminent. The lodge wasn't just a social organization. It was an underground network protecting black families from lynching, arson, and forced displacement. Music. One letter from September 1895 caught Harrison's attention. It was addressed to Brother Thomas C. Richmond and signed by the Philadelphia Lodge Master. We acknowledge your urgent communication regarding increased tensions. Preparations are being made for your family's arrival should circumstances require immediate departure. Your son's leadership has been noted, and his skills will be invaluable to our broader mission. Trust that brotherhood extends beyond geography. Harrison showed it to Dr. Hughes. This was written a month before the photograph. They were already planning to leave Richmond. And Daniel wasn't just fleeing, she added. He was being recruited. Look at this. She handed him a report dated January 1896, 3 months after the family's arrival in Philadelphia. Brother Daniel Caldwell has successfully coordinated the safe relocation of 3 families from North Carolina. His experience with rapid evacuation protocols and his understanding of railroad timetables proved essential. The picture was becoming clearer. Daniel Caldwell had been a conductor of sorts, not on the Underground Railroad of the slavery era, but on a new network helping families escape Jim Crow terror. Harrison found more references. Families moved from Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, all with Daniel's name attached to the operations. The young man in the photograph had been far more than a lodge member. He had been a lifeline. But then in late 1897, the tone of the documents changed. A coded telegram from a Richmond contact, former associates asking questions about DC. Stop, suggest, music, suspended operations. Stop, safety compromised. Another from January 1898, rumors of infiltration, trust, no emergency communications not verified through primary channels. Dr. Hughes and Harrison exchanged glances. Someone was looking for him. Harrison said, someone from Richmond who wanted him stopped. They found one final document in the box, a brief note dated March 1898, unsigned. The brother we have lost gave everything to protect others. His absence creates a void that cannot be filled. We must honor his sacrifice by continuing the work, even as we grieve what has been taken from us. Harrison sat back in his music chair. Daniel Caldwell had disappeared because he had been too effective, too visible. The hand signal in the photograph wasn't just identification. It was defiance. It was a young man saying, "This is who I am. This is what I stand for, and I will not hide." Back in Richmond, Harrison couldn't stop thinking about Daniel C. Well, a 25-year-old who had risked everything, who had saved families, who had vanished without a trace. He needed to know if anyone remembered him, if any descendants existed who might hold pieces of the story. Marcus Freeman had been working the genealogical angle, and when Harrison called him, Marcus sounded energized. "I found them," Marcus said. Isaiah Caldwell Wells line. He married in 1902, had 4 children. The family stayed in Philadelphia for generations. "I've got a living great-granddaughter, Dr. Evelyn Ross. She's a retired professor in Philadelphia, and she's willing to talk to you." Harrison booked another train ticket immediately. Dr. Evelyn Ross lived in a brownstone in West Philadelphia, its front room filled with bookshelves and family photographs. She was 78 with silver hair and eyes that held both warmth and careful assessment. "My grandfather told me stories about his Uncle Daniel," she said, gesturing for Harrison to sit. But the family never talked about him openly. There was always this sense that his name carried danger. Harrison showed her the 1895 photograph. Evelyn held it gently, tears forming in her eyes. "I've never seen this." "Never. We Bell have pictures of Thomas and Ruth, of Isaiah and Caleb in their later years, but nothing from Richmond. Nothing from before they left." She traced Daniel's face with her finger. "Grandfather said Daniel was brilliant, that he could have done anything, been a lawyer, a doctor. But he chose to help people instead." "What else did your grandfather say?" Harrison asked carefully. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to a desk in the corner. She unlocked a drawer and pulled out a worn journal. "This belonged to Isaiah. He wrote in it sporadically throughout his life. After he died, my mother gave it to me. There are entries about Daniel." She opened to a page marked with a ribbon. "May I read it to you?" Harrison nodded. Evelyn's voice was steady but emotional. "I dream of Daniel often. I see him as he was that last morning, confident and purposeful, telling Mother he would return by evening. He never doubted the rightness of what he did, saving families, standing against those who would destroy us. Father says Daniel knew the risks, that he chose them willingly. I am proud to have called him brother and ashamed that I was not brave enough to walk beside him into danger. Harrison felt the weight of those words. Did Isaiah ever learn what happened? No, Evelyn said, closing the journal. The family searched for years. They hired investigators, contacted police in multiple cities, reached out through the lodge network. Nothing. It was as though Daniel had been erased from existence. She paused, but there was one thing. A Snorts package arrived at the family's home in 1910, 12 years after Daniel disappeared. No return address, postmarked from Washington, D.C. What was in it? Harrison asked. Evelyn opened the drawer again and carefully lifted out a small wooden box. She handed it to Harrison. Inside, wrapped in aged cloth, was a bronze medallion, the official emblem of a Grand United Order of Oddfellows Worthy Master, engraved on the back, DC 1895. This was Daniel's, Evelyn said. Someone kept it for 12 years, then sent it home. No note, no explanation. Just this. Harrison held the medallion, feeling its weight. Someone had known. Someone had wanted the family to have this piece of Daniel back. Harrison spent the next week in archives across 3 cities. In Washington, D.C., he found newspaper reports from 1898 about unidentified bodies pulled from the Toke River. None matched Daniel's description. In Baltimore, he searched police records for missing persons cases. Nothing. The young man had vanished as thoroughly as if he had never existed. But Harrison had learned enough about Daniel Caldwell to know that his disappearance wasn't random. It was targeted, planned, and executed by people who wanted to stop the lodge's rescue operations. What haunted Harrison most was the photograph. Why take such a formal, expensive portrait just weeks before fleeing Richmond? He returned to Dr. Hughes in Philadelphia with a new question. Could the photograph itself have been a warning, a message to other lodge members? Dr. Hughes pulled out original lodge correspondence again. Let me check something. She searched through letters until she found one dated October 1895, the same month the photograph was taken. Listen to this, she said. It's from Thomas Caldwell to the Philadelphia Lodge Master. We have created a record of our family as it stands today. Should circumstances separate us, this image will serve as testament to who we were and what we stood for. My eldest son wishes it known that he serves the Brotherhood with full knowledge of the costs. Harrison felt his pulse quicken. They knew when they walked into Morris and Son's studio. They knew they might not all survive what was coming. There's more. Dr. Hughes continued. The Richmond Lodge was under surveillance by white supremacist groups throughout 1895. There are references in these letters to watchers and informants. Thomas and his family weren't just members, they were visible leaders. Their home was a meeting place. Daniel personally coordinated relocations for families being threatened. She pulled out a telegram. Clay Street address compromised. Immediate evacuation recommended. Richmond, brother. October 20th, 1895. 8 days after the photograph, the family had fled days after having their portrait taken. It wasn't just a family photo, Harrison said slowly. It was evidence, proof that they existed, that they stood together. If they died, this would remain. Dr. Hughes nodded, and Daniel's hand signal. In the photograph, it's clear, deliberate. Anyone who knew the signs would understand immediately. This man is a worthy master. This man has authority. This man is not backing down. Harrison thought about the families Daniel had saved. The families in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, who had made it to safety because a 25-year-old from Richmond had coordinated trains, safe houses, and resources. How many people owed their lives to him, and how many enemies had he made in the process? I think I know why he disappeared, Harrison said. Someone needed to make an example of him. Someone wanted to send a message to other lodge members. This is what happens when you help people escape. Dr. Hughes was quiet for a moment, but they failed, didn't they? The lodge kept operating. Daniel's brothers continued the work. The network survived. She looked at the photograph of the Caldwell family frozen in time. He won. They couldn't erase what he built, no matter what they did to him. Harrison returned to Richmond with a new determination. If Daniel Cowell had been targeted, there would be records. Threats, incidents, something in the white supremacist group's own documentation. He contacted Dr. Raymond Porter, a historian at the University of Richmond, who specialized in Reconstruction era racial violence. I need access to records of organizations like the Red Shirts and White League in Richmond, 1890s, Harrison explained. Specifically, anything about the Grand United Order of Oddfellows? Reporter's expression was grim. Those records exist, but they're disturbing. Are you sure you want to go down this path? I need to understand what Daniel Caldwell was facing, Harrison said. I need to know what he stood against. 2 days later, Harrison sat in a locked archive room reading documents that made his hands shake. Letters between white supremacist leaders discussed the Negro fraternal problem and strategies for disrupting their organizational networks. One letter from September 1895 specifically mentioned the Caldwell family and their dangerous influence. But it was a journal entry from a Richmond Red Shirts member that provided the clearest picture. Written in November 1895, it detailed an attack plan for the Clay Street address, an attack that never happened because the family had already fled. The writer expressed frustration. The eldest son, Daniel, was the primary target. His escape denies us the opportunity to demonstrate the consequences of their insolence. Harrison photographed the page with trembling hands. This was proof Daniel hadn't just disappeared. He had been hunted. He continued searching and found a name that appeared repeatedly in connection with investigations into Daniel's whereabouts. Augustus Brennan, a private investigator who worked for white business owners. Brennan's reports tracked Daniel's movements in Philadelphia through 1896 and 1897. Music, the final report dated February 1898, was chilling in its brevity. Subject located. Meeting arranged through false lodge communication. Contract fulfilled. Harrison sat back, feeling sick. Daniel had been lured to what he thought was a lodge emergency and walked into a trap. 12-year gap before his medallion was returned suggested someone's conscience had finally broken. Music, perhaps someone who had participated, who had kept the medallion as proof, and who finally decided the family deserved to know Daniel had existed, had mattered. Harrison gathered copies of everything and called Evelyn Ross. I found answers, he told her, not all of them. I don't know where Daniel's buried or exactly how he died, but I know why. Music, I know what he stood for and why they feared him. Tell me, Evelyn said. Harrison spent an hour explaining everything. The rescue network, the surveillance, the planned attack on Clay Street, the targeted assassination. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice thick with emotion. My grandfather was right. Daniel chose this. He knew the dangers and chose to stand anyway. She paused. Dr. Harrison, what happens now? Does this story just go back into the archives? Harrison looked at the photograph on his desk. The Caldwell family dressed in their finest, facing a future they knew might destroy them. No, he said, this story needs to be told. People need to know what Daniel Caldwell did, what all of them did. Harrison spent 3 months writing. He contacted the Virginia Historical Society, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and the national headquarters of the Grand United Order of Oddfellows. He proposed an exhibition and published research paper, The Caldwell Family and the Secret Network, Fraternal Organizations and Resistance in Post-Reconstruction America. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Historians, genealogists, and descendants of other lodge members reached out with their own stories, their own photographs, their own family secrets. The exhibition opened on a Saturday morning in April at the Virginia Historical Society. The centerpiece was the 1895 Caldwell family photograph, professionally restored and enlarged. Beside it, Harrison had arranged documents, letters, lodge records, and Isaiah's journal entries, a timeline traced to Daniel's rescue operations. A map showed the network of safe houses and railroad routes used to relocate threatened families. The room was packed. Historians, students, community leaders, and most importantly, descendants. Evelyn Ross stood before her great-great-uncle's photograph with her extended family. 19 people who had traveled from Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Chicago. Many were seeing Daniel's face for the first time. Evelyn nephew, a high school history teacher named Marcus Ross, stood beside Harrison. "My students are going to learn about this," he said quietly. "They're going to know that resistance didn't end with abolition, that courage looked like this. A family posing for a photograph they knew might be their last, refusing to hide who they were." Harrison watched as visitors moved through the exhibition. Reading the documents, studying the photographs, a college student stopped in front of Daniel's image and stared at the hand signal for several minutes. An elderly woman wiped tears as she read Ruth Caldwell's letter about her son's disappearance. A father explained to his young daughter what the Grand United Order of Oddfellows had done, why it had mattered. The local news covered the opening. The story spread through academic journals, genealogy forums, and social media. Other families came forward with similar photographs, similar hand music signals, similar stories of ancestors who had been part of the secret network. A researcher from North Carolina contacted Harrison with evidence that one of the families Daniel had saved music had gone on to establish a successful blackhound business that still operated today. 4 generations of prosperity built on the foundation of one young man's courage. Dr. Hughes called with news that the Grand United Order of Oddfellows was creating a memorial program to honor members like Daniel who had disappeared while protecting others. "They're calling it the Caldwell Initiative," she told Harrison. "Your research made this possible." But the moment that affected Harrison most came 3 weeks after the opening. A man in his 80s approached him at the exhibition, moving slowly with a cane. "My grandmother was one of the family your Daniel Caldwell saved," he said. 1897 from Georgia. She was 9 years old. She lived to be 93. Saw her children and grandchildren grow up free and safe. She used to say an angel helped them escape. "Now I know his name." Harrison shook the man's hand, unable to speak. This was why history mattered. This was why photographs like the Caldwells had to be preserved, studied, understood. Because behind every formal portrait was a human story. And some of those stories had the power to change how we understood courage itself. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Harrison received a call from a National Park Service historian. The house at 412 Clay Street in Richmond, the Caldwell family home, still stood, though it had been divided into apartments decades ago. The Park Service wanted to explore designating it as a historic site, part of a broader initiative to preserve locations significant to African American resistance and community organizing. Harrison stood on the front steps of the house on a cool October morning, the same month the Caldwells had taken their photograph 129 years earlier. The building needed work, the facade was crumbling, windows were broken, but the bones were solid. He imagined Thomas and Ruth inside, hosting lodge meetings. He imagined young Daniel coordinating rescue operations from these rooms, writing telegrams and code, planning routes north. This had been a place of courage. Evelyn Ross joined him along with 12 other Caldwell descendants. They had come from across the country for this moment. The Park Service representative explained the restoration plans. The building would house a research center dedicated to studying fraternal organizations' role in protecting black communities during Jim Crow. One room would be permanently devoted to Daniel Caldwell and the rescue network he had built. "We're also working with the Oddfellows National Organization," the representative continued. "They're funding scholarships in Daniel's name for students studying African American history and social justice." Evelyn smiled through tears. He would have loved that, using his story to help others learn, to help them fight their own battles. Harrison thought about his first moment seeing the photograph at that estate auction. How a $1.15 box of miscellaneous items had led to all of this. How a hand signal frozen in time had unlocked a story of networks, sacrifice, and resistance, that music spanned cities and saved lives. The photograph itself now resided in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Millions of visitors each year would see the Caldwell family, Thomas and Ruth, Daniel and Isaiah and Caleb, standing together in their finest clothes, facing the camera with dignity, clear throat, and defiance, and they would read music Daniel's story. They would understand what that hand signal meant. They would know that in 1895, being brave sometimes meant posing for a photograph and declaring to the world exactly who you were, knowing that declaration might cost you everything. As Harrison stood on Clay Street, he received a text from Dr. Hughes. Attached was a photograph of a new historical marker being installed in Philadelphia at the site of Lodge 75. Here stood a sanctuary of the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, where Daniel Caldwell and countless others worked in secret to protect families fleeing racial terror. Their courage saved lives, their legacy endures. Harrison showed the photo to Evelyn. She read it slowly, then looked up at the Richmond house. Daniel was 25 when he disappeared, just 25, and look what he built, look what he did, look what he continues to do. Harrison corrected gently, "Your family's story is teaching people right now. Students, researchers, families discovering their own histories." Daniel's work didn't end when he disappeared. It's still happening. As the sun set over Richmond, Harrison took one final photograph of the Clay Street house. Later, he would add it to the exhibition, Past and Present Connected. A building that had witnessed both terror and triumph, now being reclaimed as a symbol of the resistance that had flourished within its walls. The mystery of the 1895 photograph had been solved, but more than that, a man who had been deliberately erased from history had been restored. Daniel Caldwell's name would be remembered. His courage would inspire, and the hand signal he had made in that studio one October day, the declaration of who he was and what he stood for, would never be forgotten again. Some photographs are just images, others are testimonies, and a very few are messages sent across time waiting for someone to finally understand what they mean. This portrait from 1895 had held its secret for more than a century. Now at last the world knew the truth.